Onstage, Onstage with Jim and Tom. 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 Tom and Jim.
Tonight, we welcome Gender Trash to the stage of the Phoenix Theater. This is a band that describes themselves as gender nonconforming feminist folk punk that promotes nihilistic optimism. Tonight, we'll learn about who these folks are, what drives them, and later they'll play a set of music. Please welcome to the program, Gender Trash.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's so good to be here.
I am thrilled.
I love this place.
Can I ask what nihilistic optimism is?
That is a good question. I don't believe that I coined that phrase.
That would be my fault. I don't know. You can look at nihilism as being generally kind of pessimistic, like whatever we do, it doesn't matter because the world's going to end or it's all just going to go to shit. At the same time, you can kind of, I don't know, look at it as a way to promote being more optimistic, to being, there's plenty of garbage, but that doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Well, that was a very good basic foundational question. Truly it was. And I would like to follow it with another basic foundational question, which I would be thrilled if we could stretch out for the duration of like 5 hours. That question is, of course, why is gender trash?
Why is gender trash? Well, I personally don't think that gender is actually trash.
I suppose the question should have been, do you think that gender is trash?
My gender is certainly trash. Gender is also trash in that it's like, it's reusable. You can throw it away. I'm being way too abstract here. I kind of want to get down and dirty to the literal origins of the name of the band.
I would love to. I would love to. And the only thing that I would say is I think that there would be a number of people listening to this who have no concept or matching definition with you all about what gender is. I think that we train people in our society to look at gender in a certain way, and I have a feeling that the three of you look at it in a much, much different way.
Absolutely. I mean, gender is sort of ingrained from the very beginning. I think it's still pretty standard practice to have gender reveal parties when somebody's pregnant. The first question a lot of people ask is, when they find out that you're expecting, it's like, oh, what are you having? And it's like, well, I'm having a human, but, a lot of people mean, oh, are you having a boy or a girl? And it's like, how does that even pertain to what the personality and the expectations of this child? How does that really define, as opposed to any of the other attributes, the millions of other attributes that this child is going to be born with? And, I think that expectation just sort of follows us through our entire lives. It's how we define a lot of people when we first meet them. We instantly start putting people into boxes. So, I know at least for myself, trying to spend more time introducing myself and spend less time trying to define other people. And so that's one of the boxes that I try to just do away with. I personally identify as female and prefer she, her pronouns, though I'm fine with they or them as well. And, that has its own kind of meaning and definition to me, but I try not to ascribe that to other people and define, I perceive you as male, and so therefore you like this, and this. I think most people's tastes and personality traits fall on this huge spectrum, and that their gender, whether it conforms with how they were assigned at birth or whether it doesn't play into too many of those traits.
Well said. Yeah, great.
I've never done this before. Kidding.
I really like what you said about not making an assessment or a judgment from across the room, because I feel like that is kind of at the core of this different way of looking at this issue than society teaches us. I think that we're taught that it's acceptable to look at someone across the room and be like, and excuse me if this is inappropriate, but people do it all the time, is that a he or a she, you know? And then starting to like talk and gossip and speculate. I mean, I think like it, in terms of like gender issues 101, that's like a big no-no, but that is not something that we are taught when we're children. Would you agree with that?
Well, I learned that actually it's like one of the first things that our brain subconsciously tries to decipher is gender, whether or not we're like thinking about it. And I don't know why that is, but socially ingrained is definitely a big factor in that. Yeah.
I feel like we have an opportunity to socially ingrain different constructs, like with this conversation right now. I feel like conversations like this were pretty non-existent in the recent past, and I feel like we're setting the groundwork for multiple generations to come to what gender even means, or if it'll even mean anything anymore.
What does it mean?
You know, we're as I was listening to Ariel. Actually, no. When you had asked, we are born with it ingrained in us, but I think that's almost a prehistoric ingraining. There was a time when you were born and you were pretty much going to be assigned what you were going to do as a member of the tribe or the family or whatever it was, based on what gender they perceived you to be. So this is probably thousands and thousands of years of us working through that. We're now in a brave new world, and we can...
In which gender trash can exist.
Yeah, which gender trash can exist, and because we can finally think about it openly, we get to decide how we want to, what is it, assign ourselves or decide for ourselves?
Well, I think, I mean, for myself, I had a very good concept of my gender from, I would say, the time that I was 5 or 6. It just happened not to conform with the gender that I was assigned at birth. But, I certainly had no doubt about, how I perceived myself. I just unfortunately spent a few decades hiding it, based on a necessity in the era that I grew up in.
Yeah, I don't think history had caught up with you at that point.
I don't think so. But, I think now we're in an era where not only, at least in particular pockets and bubbles, you can start, coming out and defining it for yourself, but you can also explore it. So, I have a lot of friends of all ages who are much more fluid, or of course non-binary, where, either they kind of move back and forth between, sort of a social norm of what male and female is. And, they might spend a year presenting more masculine, and then they might spend a few months presenting more feminine and go back and forth. Or, they might not really feel comfortable with either. And so then you have, someone who's non-binary, and because neither construct really fits them, and they're really just sort of, neutral to it.
Which can be confusing to people who have looked at it one way their entire life. We have guests on this show who sometimes say in advance, my pronouns are they, them. And in the beginning, that was something new, like a new concept. And I think the way you just worded it is like a really good way to explain that.
I mean, it really depends on the person and how they identify. I don't even really like to describe non-binary, define it as a term, because it encompasses so many people in the world. Just like it makes me uncomfortable to try to define gender as a term. I define gender as a way of self-expression, and it's like a combination of these things between self-expression and our relationship with our bodies, other people and how they perceive us, and then also our relationship with how other people perceive us in our bodies. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I also just want to say that I appreciate the willingness to have a conversation like this, because I think that when we become aware that there are more than more than just male and female when there is this whole non-binary way of looking at things. Everybody is coming at it from different levels of education, and some people are nervous, some people don't know what to say, some people say things the wrong way. So anyway, conversations like this are very useful, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, but you guys put it right out there, gender trash. All right, when you step on stage to do a show, is that a part of the conversation prior and after? Does it follow you through your shows and performances?
Oftentimes, people are interested in us just because of our name.
Yeah.
They are like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I want to know about that because it's pretty out there. So I used to open up shows by saying, like, throw away your gender. You don't need it or whatever. But I'm not sure about throwing it away. I like to sort through trash. I like to dissect my trash. I like to rip my trash up, make it into art. Do that with your gender, you know?
I think that what people don't realize is that being a gender non-conforming individual in the society, even in a supportive community like Sonoma County, it can still be like very, very painful. And I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind speaking to that a bit.
I mean, certainly, being in the bubble comes with a lot of privileges to being outside of the bubble as far as access to care and certain amount of security and safety. But at the same time, I think there's a certain complacency amongst those who, aren't directly affected. So, we're a great ally and everything's good. And aren't you lucky to be in Sonoma County? And, they forget that, Sonoma County is very diverse, and it's diverse in its population and its viewpoints and its tolerance. And, just as with racial issues, it's not all perfect. And, I'm at a point now where, I don't run into a lot of problems. I hate using the term, but I'm fairly passable. But certainly in the first year, after I came out and before I was really connected with the community and while I was in transition, I was much more easily identifiable as a trans person. And, a number of the things that someone here might think, oh, well, that doesn't happen as much here. That happens in North Carolina, or where, we see the news about, the kind of the blatant prejudice against trans people. But it does happen here. I have been accosted verbally and physically within Sonoma County. I've had difficulty getting jobs or maintaining jobs, getting care from even social workers. And that isn't to suggest there aren't a ton of people who are amazing and supportive and stuff, because there are. But I just think you run the risk of getting too comfortable. And, when you are that particular subset of the population, whether it's racially or your gender identity or your expression, sexuality, whatever, I think you're much more aware that as good as it is, there's a long ways to go. And we're still very, very much affected by prejudices. Sometimes it's just, in some ways it's almost a little more dangerous because, you're going along and things do seem fine, and you're not expecting it. And then suddenly you run into a person or persons who take issue with how you are. And, unfortunately, then, you're forced to deal with it.
This has been sitting at the back of my mind, or the front of my mind, really. I just wanted to bring up the fact that, like, a lot of this gender-centered oppression comes from the Western culture. And, the land that was the United States of America was filled with a lot of people who identified outside of the gender binary, and there are lots of cultures who recognized genders other than male or female before the whole colonization of the world. And these gender issues are like very much tied up in race issues as well. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that up because it feels like my job to bring that up.
No, thank you for bringing that up. And that does bring me back to the point, Tom, that you were making earlier, just in commenting about how earlier, human experience and civilization thousands of years ago and sort of that ingrained gender roles. I think there's plenty of evidence throughout history showing that there was more acceptance, even though the gender roles were there. If you didn't identify within that, there was much more acceptance of moving into the other role.
You mentioned, Ariel, that, for decades, this was something you sat with. Isn't it wild the last 10 years? I mean, how much progress there's been in terms of tolerance in our local community. I mean, there's still a long ways to go. But I look at, the conversations that we're having now, to your point earlier. I mean, this is a conversation that we did not have the language for 10 years ago, and I'm not even sure that anybody would have even known what we were talking about. Now it's very front and center, at least in conversations.
Oh, I'd absolutely agree with you. I had a friend ask a little while ago about was it, it seems like there's so much further to go. Was it that much worse back when? And I was like, yes, trust me. As far as we have to go, there has been a ton of progress. And I would say even just within maybe the last 3 to 4 years, in terms of, even recognizing the community, even having discussions about pronouns, the willingness of school systems, California state laws, which help support children coming out in schools in terms of recognizing their identity and recognizing the bathroom that they're comfortable using, and supporting them at the state level, that weren't there 3, 4, 5 years ago. There's a reason I didn't come out until pretty recently, relative to my age, and so while I wish I had in a lot of ways, certainly coming out later, offered me more tools, support, and ability to find community. The internet has been wonderful in that regard, in terms of connecting. And
the internet is great for that, for building community.
Yeah, for all its fault, the reason that I was even in the space where I met Wilder is because of finding, desperately seeking people within the local queer population. Because the minute I came out, I alienated probably about 80% of my friends and family. I just kind of dove in and started finding people, and then finding within those communities, who are the art-minded people, who are the people making music and in the scene, what queer people hang out at the Phoenix, it's, in other ways to relate to them. And then from there, getting the support and getting pointed in the right directions.
You had mentioned representation, Wilder, in the lead up to this, and that's sort of something that you look to as a very important thing. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's the whole reason that I'm still here doing music, not being alive, but there's a lot of other reasons for that. I just it's really about the looks on young queer people's faces when they hear about our band, and how excited they are just that we exist and that we're doing our thing. And so that's really important to me that we can be here doing that in the public eye for people. And just being brave and being yourself in front of people gives other people permission, no matter who they are, to be brave and be themselves, unless they're Nazis. Fucking Nazis. Don't be yourself if you're a Nazi. Fucking change.
I just want to second that. I think one of my favorite parts, well, there's so many parts about this band that I adore. But when we do play a show and you see people who you might not have seen in a lot of the other spaces come out, you know, maybe not because we're necessarily that wonderful or whatever else or that entertaining, but just because they see representation, because, you know, they see people who they can identify with, and it makes them comfortable and it gives them a space.
Well, they
also
can see
makes
people
me
being
comfortable.
successful.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, Ariel, when you're watching you drum, you're fucking an incredible drummer.
It's true.
And I've got to watch that growth over the years. And as I was watching you record tonight, my God.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
I think I've gotten a little better.
But this is what
You make me better. So.
You're a great drummer.
Well, it helps to be comfortable with myself. I think there's a big difference between how I play now and how I used to play. There's a lot less ego, and I also have the support of these two beautiful people. And I don't know, it's been amazing.
I feel really blessed to have you guys as bandmates.
There's an intangible feeling to seeing somebody who perhaps, you know, if you're queer or if you're gay, if you're trans, seeing somebody get up on the stage and perform and being like, that person is like me. There's just like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like a warmth. It's like a feeling of contentment in your stomach. And I think that is, you know, kind of what you're saying about why representation is important, because those people that you watching you feel that.
Yeah.
And they feel
See
less,
that.
they feel less, whatever they're feeling negatively. I mean, I can speak to that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say like none of us are alone, and so it's important to feel that and to know that we're not alone. Just, yeah.
Even if it feels that way.
Even
you know?
if it feels that way.
And I'm sure that there were times in all of our lives, definitely, but having these experiences where you do feel alone. I mean, it's not even like logical, because you're not alone. Nobody is really alone, but it can definitely feel like you're alone.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't told many people this before, but I almost went back in the closet after Trump got elected. And it's moments like that where you kind of got to make a decision, and you're like, well, do I want to do that, which is totally valid, or do I want to keep trying to live authentically and have my band called Gender Trash and be louder and even more in your face, which is also a valid option. And that's the option that I chose. So,
you know, this stuff is all deeply personal, and that's one thing that I've learned as someone who tries to be an ally and tries to learn and tries to understand things that are not, you know, that I'm not directly experiencing, is I've learned in the last few years that this is deeply personal stuff, and to even discuss it is really like revealing a part of yourself that many people would not feel comfortable doing. And all I can say is, like, I think that this is what helps everybody understand everybody else better. So, I mean, I just can't say thank you enough for coming.
Yeah.
Not that I'm wrapping up.
well,
I just,
but still,
Thank you for having us.
yeah.
yeah, because I mean, really, like 3 or 4 years ago, I would have entered this interview, and I would have had, and this is just me being honest about my ignorance, I would have had no respect for how deeply personal this stuff is.
I honestly, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been yelling and in your face, but we still would have been friends afterward, which is weird. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just a function of more education. You know, I mean, I'm not saying as many dumb things as I potentially would have 3 or 4 years ago, and you're not yelling at me quite as much. You know what I love that you said earlier, Ariel, was that you feel like you're almost a better drummer now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because there's less ego, and that is because of like the profound amount of work you did to shed that ego, I would assume.
I mean, there's a lot of layers to that discussion, but
That is probably way too simple the way that I just put it, just so you know.
I like simple answers. I'm just bad at giving them.
Well, be as extensive as you want, because I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful point.
Well, I mean, for me, and this isn't everyone's experience within the trans community, but, for me, I always felt like I was playing a character. So the person I am and the way that I express myself and the way that I act is very much how I've always been, but I've always had to sort of repress it. And, I got very good at playing this kind of masculine character that everyone expected of me. And I would, kind of refine it over the years. Well, even the way that I played drums was defined by how this character, how this person was supposed to play drums. And, so it had to be much more exact and technical. And there was much more like I needed a lot more, positive feedback about did the character play well? Did I live up to the expectation of this person? Because, even though maybe it was everyone else completely perceived that person, I felt like it was a fragile costume that could break any time, and people would be aware that I was this thing I was not supposed to be. So, as soon as I shed that costume, and, even though in so many ways my life fell apart, I was like, well, if I'm going to take it off, I'm going to take it off. And so for some people, it was like night and day. They're just dressing different, talking different, walking different, whatever, and even playing drums differently. And I just relaxed. I became much more, musically much more present. And, I was very fortunate to find people who really supported that. For me, music is best when it comes from inside of you in a place of emotion. And it's hard to tap into that kind of comfortable emotion when, you have all those other things going on.
Absolutely. And I think that was said really beautifully. Thank you. Is there anything that we haven't talked about tonight that we feel should be in the Gender Trash episode of this show?
I feel like I should talk about, because I feel like it relates to a lot of the things we talked about, how I discovered non-binary identities and kind of came around to that language. Which was on Tumblr, as I mentioned before, but it was my friend told me about our other mutual friend who was agender, and I was like, oh, okay, what's that? And they told me, they were like, oh, well, they're not a boy and they're not a girl, and they just don't really experience a gender. And I just kind of accepted that, because after coming out and reflecting on it, really, for me, it was I was what I was, but then I found words for it, and I was like, oh, that's what I am. Oh, okay, cool, because I've always been that, but I've been this other thing that is kind of what people expect of me and what I thought was that's what I was, and that's fine, but this is also what I am, and that's super cool. And I came out as gender fluid over a Word document through Facebook to people who I cared about. It was 80 people or something. And I was like, you're my close people and you should know this. And otherwise, it's whatever. It's not that important. I just thought you guys should know this about me. And I was like, I'm gender fluid. I'm this whatever, this other thing, Demi, and you can use he pronouns or she pronouns or they pronouns, and that's cool. Just use whatever pronouns. And a lot of my friends were like, oh, what a relief. We can just call you she and her and call you girl forever, and we don't have to worry about it. And I was like, no, wait, that's not what I meant. No, I said, please use all the pronouns. Okay. So then I was like, no, just use they, only they. And that's why I brought up, yelling before is because I was very adamant about this. I was like, no, if I'm going to do it, I got to let people know. I got to educate people. It's my job to let people know, because if they don't know, then they got me all wrong, and that's not cool. And like also their whole line of thinking is just like wrong, and we need to educate the world about biology and how it's so much more than just male and female. And I was like, blah, and I was like that for like 3 or 4 years.
And I really appreciate you sharing that, because we all go through different phases in our lives and whatever it is that we have going on, and that is something that sometimes is the way that it manifests itself.
Yeah.
And you did that, and then I don't know what happened next, but you obviously you've kind of shifted away from that.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely gone back to like, oh, well, you can use like whatever pronouns, and gender is fluid. We all kind of experience it in totally individual ways, which is, I feel like, important to recognize as well. And so like where, like I felt that way before, like I also feel this way. And like, it's just, I don't know, it all happens all at once and not at all. And it's really weird. But yeah, I mean, like, nowadays, I'm partially because of what I said before about kind of going back into the closet, and like there's some fear there where I kind of let people assume what they want about me until it's actually important to me that they know this thing about me. Whereas before, I would very much be like, it's they. Here is a learning opportunity for you by me. You're welcome. And I try not to do that anymore, because it kind of turns people off. And I mean, a lot of people have been appreciative of it, and I definitely don't like regret being like that. But it's a lot of emotional work to be asserting your gender all of the time. So now I'm just like, it's me.
I truly appreciate you sharing that, because that's a journey that you went on. Yeah. And I think Tom and I have had people on this show who have said, please, they, them. And later on, it's no longer they, them. And it can be kind of confusing, I think, to maybe people who get to know you one way to say, well, how did this change? And the answer is that, nothing really changed. It's just that, this is where I'm at now.
Yeah, this is what it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because I've seen that path that you just described in a number of my friends. Mm-hmm. And not to speak at all about your intention or why it went that way. I just feel like perhaps when one makes a discovery about themselves, there is an urgency for the world to know. And there's a lot of emotion that goes on inside oneself. And sometimes it feels like the most important thing in the world for everyone to know. And then other times it's like, just stay out of my business. And it's this roller coaster that we go on. So that resonates a bit with me. Ariel, how long have you known Tom Gaffey?
Well, one of my favorite stories of my childhood is my very first job Tom gave me, and it was cleaning the nacho cheese bucket or whatever that thing was. Oh, and by cleaning, I mean like
my apologies,
scraping it out.
And what year was that about?
It was a while ago.
that had to be 80s. Was that 80s?
No, 90s.
Okay,
geez, I'm not that old.
All I want to say is
early 90s.
Despite all of the trash and despite all the garbage, and there's plenty of it in the world, it's pretty fucking cool to be having this conversation right here, right now in 2018. I mean, things have changed a lot, but for you two to know each other that long and to be able to be doing this right now and having this type of conversation is pretty special.
Huge to me, yeah.
Oh my God. I just thought of all the trash that has happened since then.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of trash.
I have to say I haven't had a lot of stability in my life, and but the Phoenix Theater and Tom Gaffey have been probably one of the most stable things through a lot of ups and downs. So anyway, thanks.
It's been a hell of a cool ride.
You better be here forever, Tom.
Sticking around.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Good.
Well, Gender Trash, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been a very incredible conversation, and I know that there's been moments that have been deeply, deeply personal, and it was very generous of you to share those with us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much.
The platform is generous. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
so
you.
much.
And now, my God, the music of Gender Trash is up next. We've talked a lot, and now the reason we're here, the music that you play. So everybody should stick around. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, guys.